Scary shit that happened to you as a kid that you still don't have an explanation for. When I was a kid, the neighborhood I lived in sat directly next to a partially abandoned scrap yard. It was clearly once used for making something, but there was absolutely no upkeep outside of old parts occasionally being dropped off and left to rust. In addition, it was only fenced off on one side, which left it completely open on the end connected to where I lived. Obviously, being an 11-year-old with little to no supervision, I would visit the place a lot just to explore and see what I could find. I thought it was so hardcore that I had to show my equally irresponsible friends one day. They come over, and we dick around for a bit before finding something sticking out of the ground near the far end of the scrap yard. It had rained pretty heavy the night before, so the sloped edges that formed a makeshift border had eroded, and something obviously came down with the dirt. It was a bone. My initial thought was that someone dumped their garbage nearby and it was some kind of chicken or turkey bone, until my friend pulled it out of the mud. It was about 7 inches long and 3/4 of an inch in diameter, with bits of sinew still clinging to it. Obviously, we freak and call the cops. I still don't know what kind of bone it was. Pig related, it looked kind of like this. Be 8-year-old me. Super sick. Fever and whatever. Go to bed, try to sleep. Wake up to this sound. It's an awful sound, like the noise you make when you fall off a swing and the air is forced out of you. Try to look around, can't move. Realize the sound is coming from me. My mom comes to the door. I manage to turn my head. Fucking huge 7-foot-tall skeleton. Standing where she's standing. Doing this fucked up motion. Like those wooden toys where you press the bottom and they go limp. Just gyrating there where my mom was standing. Lustmishit.jpg. My mom rushed to me and got me up, and by the time she did it was gone. She said my face was all blue like I couldn't breathe when she first walked in, and she panicked and froze. I should preface this by explaining my relationship with the paranormal, or more specifically my relationship with my belief in the paranormal. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, spirits, an afterlife, or other dimensions. It all seems possible to me, but there's never going to be concrete evidence, and I'm not going to spend my mortal life worrying about what happens after I pass. In other words, I'm not religious. However, my mom is, and she's a firm believer in heaven, hell, and ghosts who visit Earth. When I was a child, she would retell her ghostly encounters anytime someone asked, or simply anytime there was nothing else to talk about. She never told them in the vein of an older kid trying to scare the younger kids at a campfire, holding a flashlight under their chin and cueing a friend to jump out screeching from a nearby bush at the punchline, but it was more like how one might recount a strange or interesting interaction with someone at work or in the grocery store. They weren't intended to frighten, but rather to convey her truth. She made the paranormal seem incredibly normal, and I think that's the reason I had such an easy time accepting all of her stories as absolutely true. As a Southern Baptist, my mom is far from the strange witch lady who lives alone and has an extensive collection of tarot cards and Gothic decor. In fact, she's very much the opposite. I don't think she comes off as loopy, paranoid, or schizophrenic to anyone, despite her tendency to casually insert her paranormal experiences into conversations with people she's just met. Naturally, I grew skeptical of all this as I got older. If something not easily explainable happened to me as a child, my mom would calmly say it was probably just the ghost, referring to alleged spirit that allegedly roamed our double-wide trailer and allegedly often took the form of a member of the family to allegedly blend in unnoticed. Allegedly. After years of never questioning the suggestion that every strange thing I experienced, which upon later reflection often had a rational explanation, was the work of a paranormal entity, I began to reject the idea, much to the surprise of my mom. She would always ask, "You know you've seen and heard ghosts, why are you trying to deny it?" And it would spark a tiresome debate after which neither of us would change our minds. This never caused a rift in our relationship, but even as an adult, I still find myself in these arguments with her when I visit. I don't want to change her mind, I just want her to accept that I have different beliefs. Recently, in one of our paranormal spats, she asked me to explain an experience I had with my older cousin, Manny, that I hadn't thought about in years. Upon reflection, I realized that this story, if any, that sways me toward a belief in ghosts and an afterlife. I was 7 or 8, and Manny and his mom had come to my grandma's house to eat lunch. My parents and I lived right next to my grandma, so me and mom would walk to her house for lunch every Saturday, and afterwards the adults would lounge about while Manny and I would go to my house and play the PS1. When lunch was ready, my aunt told Manny and me to go wash our hands, and since she was busy scrubbing a dish in the kitchen sink, Manny and I had no choice but to walk down the hallway and use the bathroom sink. It was always understood to me that my grandma's house was extremely haunted. Almost all of my mom's ghost stories and all of my grandma's ghost stories took place within the walls of that old manufactured home. I never would have shown it to Manny, but deep down, I was nervous to have to walk down that long, dark hallway, all the way to the end, to the bathroom, even with his company. Sorry guys, I should have typed this in Notepad all at once, but I never post here and I don't think these things through. Anyway, I immediately knew something was off as soon as we started down the hallway. The bathroom door at the end of the hall was closed, and artificial light was peeking through the crack between the bottom of the door and the floor. It was especially odd since everyone else in the house was in the kitchen or the dining room. Manny acknowledged it first. "Somebody left the light on," he muttered. I couldn't tell if he was simply noting what he felt was obviously a minor lapse of memory from my grandma, or if he was thinking what I was thinking. As we got closer to the door, I intentionally slowed my pace and let Manny go ahead of me so that he would have to open the door. He was a couple of years older, and I didn't want him to know that I was afraid unless I first knew that he was afraid. When he finally reached out for the doorknob, my heart was racing, and his must have been too, because I could see a slight tremble in his hand, and he was clearly slowing his motions to delay facing what was behind the door. I mustered the courage to grab his forearm and stop him from opening it, and I excused my actions by asking, "Wait a second, is Grandma in there?" I knew she wasn't. I had just seen her when she left the kitchen, and it would have been physically impossible for her to beat us to the bathroom without us noticing, but I was hoping to convince Manny to go back to the kitchen with me for a quick head count. Just as the words left my mouth, the doorknob began violently shaking. We both squealed, hands drawn to our chests while the knob shook for about 3 seconds. We turned and sprinted back to the kitchen and explained what had happened to the adults. My aunt checked the bathroom, and it was empty. There were no signs of anyone getting in or out through the window. My aunt, mom, and grandma wrote it off as just another ghost, and so did me and Manny. This story is the hardest for me to explain, because it's an encounter in which myself and a witness, Manny, experienced exactly the same thing. We told everyone who would listen, but most of our friends thought we were just trying to scare them, and most adults thought we were just kids making stuff up. I wonder sometimes if someone actually did break into my grandma's bathroom that day. Perhaps the fumbling with the doorknob was an attempt to lock it. It didn't have a locking feature, to buy an extra bit of escape time. I just can't imagine someone breaking into that house in broad daylight. Firstly, Grandma lives in such a rural, open area that there would be hardly any place to hide a getaway vehicle, and it would take a lot of courage to just walk up to a house like that unless you wanted a confrontation. And of course, if there was a burglar, they didn't want a confrontation, because they fled at the sound of a child's voice. Manny and I are in the latter half of our 20s now, and I don't see him except for sometimes on holidays when we're both able to make it to Grandma's. I want to ask him if he remembers this the same as me, but I think it would be weird to bring it up now. Anyway, sorry if that wasn't very climactic. That's just what happened as I remember it, and true stories aren't always entertaining. This legitimately makes me wonder about ghosts and stuff sometimes. And when my mom asks me to explain this one, I'm stumped. Thanks for reading. Growing up, I lived on a farm, out in the boonies. Nearest neighbor was maybe a mile away. He has a junkyard in his backyard. On one of my adventures in the woods, I stumbled upon his junkyard, not realizing it was his, 'cause I never really seen the place, or so far back off the road and shrouded by trees. He caught me one day playing back there, and he comes out with a shotgun and goes, "Oh hey, I know your dad. I thought you was one them kids living back here." Kids live back here? He was gonna shoot a kid? What the fuck? Think I was 13 to 14. Laying in bed with TV on trying to sleep. Have Adult Swim playing American Dad. Episode where family moves to Pakistan, or whatever the heck the peaceful East country was. I'm watching it. Scene where they're about to get stoned in the arena is playing. I hear frickin' music box. Don't know where it's coming from. Younger sister's room is next door. She doesn't own one, and she's sleeping in my parents' room that night because she's scared of the dark. The music box music is a little more quiet than the show. It must be coming from either the hallway or my sister's room. Start screaming at the top of my lungs the same way a kid screams in a stranger danger moment. Mom. Cover my head under blanket and don't stop screaming mom until she runs into the room. Sleep in her room for the next few nights. I still don't know where the hell music box music was coming from. I always post about it, even made a thread once, but no one replied or give explanation. As a child, I remember something with nails raked around my belly button, and to this day, like over 25 years later, I am still scared of anything touching my belly button, and cannot sleep uncovered. Also would often see shit like dismembered hands and heads coming from the floor, and doll-like things crawling around the room. It stopped after I got baptized, and some of those old town witches did some praying and stuff. I got baptized like at 3, which is really late for most kids in my country. Be me in 1991 with 11 years old. Practicing mantras for the last 2 years every day and doing candle meditation to open third eye that year. Start seeing shadow people everywhere, freak out. Tell dad, he look what it looks like, a mix of scared and interested. Wish very deeply to never see them again. Stop seeing them the next day and really never saw them ever again. Never thought much about it. Switched to me 10 years ago, people talking about shadow people and saying it is not real and shit. MFW. Be 10-year-old me. Biking my way back home from friend's house. 10 p.m. Have to pass by Main Street with an adjacent football camp. All street lights off, literally no cars going by. One single ridiculously bright blinding light in the middle of the field. Stop my bike, absolutely confused. Looks around, not a single live soul around. Really weird feeling. Suddenly the light is gone. Cars start going again, street lights get back on. Nobody that lived nearby saw anything. 15 years later I still have creeps about that fucking day. As a child, my best friend was a little girl who lived in a massive Victorian house down the street from me. It was an enormous and opulent 1800s house with a dumbwaiter and everything, 3 floors high. As kids we used to play upstairs through all the labyrinthine rooms. It was always cold up there, even in summer. I always used to have to wear sweatshirts. I vividly remember playing in her room as a little kid, and knowing that there was a third kid there playing with us, on the periphery. We always used to set out a third place during tea parties. It was some sort of little girl that was always there, despite the fact that my friend was the only daughter my age in the house. One day I was up on the 2nd floor, running around looking for my friend, and I popped my head into her pink bedroom. There was an old man crouching in the corner. I didn't feel scared, just queasy. I ended up leaving downstairs and going home early. The family ended up having so many horrifying experiences there, one that made the older daughter move out permanently, that they completely abandoned the upstairs portion of the house. Last time I visited, the upstairs was completely blocked off. The way it was relayed to me, the oldest daughter came crying into her mother's bedroom one night, saying something had dragged her from the bed. The mom dismissed it as nightmares, but when she went into the bedroom the next morning, she saw claw marks on the mattress. But they weren't from the thing that had dragged her out of bed. They were score marks from the fingernails of the daughter clutching the mattress while she was being pulled out of bed. After that, the daughter was so disturbed she moved out. Apparently, according to the father, it would only become very active when the women of the house hit puberty. It would attack them and them alone. One time the youngest daughter, my best friend, was alone upstairs and she heard it imitate my voice, trying to get her to come towards it. Okay, not when I was a kid, I was 20. In the service. Anyway, my buds and I were in training at this base in Virginia, doing A and then C school. On Friday nights we would buy a bottle of bourbon or scotch, get one of those steel waste baskets and a bag of ice. We would put the ice in the waste basket, the bottle in the ice, and the whole thing in the back of one of my buds' shitty Chevy Nova. We would then drive out to Western Virginia and drive the back roads at like 20 miles an hour looking for UFOs and cryptids. Anyway, one night around 2 a.m. I am driving like 10 miles per hour, don't even have my foot on the accelerator, while one bud is sitting on the hood drunk as fuck and the other 2 guys are in the back seat, best location for drinking since that is where the bottle was. So I see some headlights approaching in the rear view mirror and I tell the guy on the hood to get inside because someone is coming up behind us. We are way out rural on little 2-lane road, no lines, no street lights, just the stars in the sky. He says, no one is behind us. I say, I see the lights in the mirror, it is a big truck. Guys in the back seat look through rear window and say, no one back there. I say, look in the goddamn mirror. Backseat guy leans over my shoulder and looks in mirror, sees headlights. Looks out rear view window, no lights. Panicked, he shouts this, it is in the mirror but not back there, it is a ghost truck. Guy on hood literally dives through front passenger window, looks in mirror and screams, it is in the mirror but not in the rear window, fucking floor it. So I did. Never saw what was or was not behind us because I only looked in mirror. Be 1 to 2 year old child. Fall down almost 2 stories from a banister. Parents find me at the bottom completely unscathed. I think I died in a lot of timelines, but here I am now. I was still of kindergarten age and terrified of the dark. I couldn't sleep other than by losing consciousness due to fatigue. One night I rushed to my parents' bedroom as I often would to enjoy the safety of being surrounded by adults and sleep in peace, but I got something else entirely. Some time had passed and my parents had undoubtedly fallen asleep, and I heard the floorboards creaking outside the room. The creaking came from the same direction I had walked in from, almost like it came from my room. I wish I had only heard it though, because looking at the doorway I've seen an adult figure passing by, shrouded in darkness. I still don't know how I managed to fall asleep that night. I remember thinking I will stand guard all night in case it comes back, and yet I fell hard asleep as I normally would while fearing the night. I'd like to explain this as a delusion of some kind, a hallucination. I have never again experienced anything like it and I hope I won't. I very clearly remember my mom having a Christmas party when I was 8 or 9 with a bunch of kids that became my friends for the night. When we were playing hide and go seek, I hid in the downstairs storage closet where the furnace was because I knew no one was brave enough to go in. I was sitting in the dark in there for a while before this huge blue orb lit up the place and I ran out screaming. Didn't go down there for weeks. In the car with Dad. Drive over a freeway bridge. Look down at the freeway to see a huge accident, multiple cars overturned, fire trucks and emergency vehicles everywhere, lanes are blocked off and traffic is slow. We get to the other side of the bridge. Tell my dad about it. He does a U-turn to go look. As we go back over the bridge, it's all vanished. No debris. No evidence at all. No way they could have cleared all that in the 20 seconds it took to turn around. Still don't know what happened. Be around 13. Cousin and I were playing on the living room L. We had a camcorder connected to the TV. No tape, just transmitting whatever the camera sees. Playing, watching the camera, seeing into infinity on the TV. We get between the TV and the camera. Cool effect and distortions. With audio we had feedback and image was very trippy. We left the camera unattended for some time. Me and cousin began to do other stuff. Suddenly we notice human silhouettes on the TV. And began to notice face features. Scary faces. Deformed expression. The whole thing lasted like 30 to 40 seconds. We both freak and call my aunt and uncle. They thought we were laying or pranking them. They took the camera away. As a kid it scared the shit out of me. Basically when I was a kid my mom walked into my empty room, and the furniture, the grain showed millions of demons moving around. The dresser told her to get the fuck out, and my mom is Christian straight as an arrow, had never done drugs. She freaked out and demanded my dad get rid of it. Thing is, the whole time before and even after, I was very sickly, and always dreaming about being in hell and evading supernatural horrors in my dreams and dealing with dead bodies crammed everywhere. The name of Jesus Christ was, and still is, the only weapon any entity I ever encountered has ever feared, and genuinely wounded them. However, I believe I am still possessed. I think the thing was likely a fallen angel, and not a demon. Warping reality like that seems like a bit much for a demon. I don't know what to do. This could just be a weird kid dream, but I vividly remembering there once being a pothole in the street near my house, about the width of a knuckle, that was filled with this neon green liquid. I remember my friend dropped a Pokemon card to see if it dissolved or something. The only proof I have of this is that you can see the square in the street where they covered up the hole with tar and asphalt. And my brother vaguely remembers it too. Be me, 6. Watching TV late at night on a Friday with my sister and her friend. Fall asleep in front of the TV. The rest is her story. She told me that the TV suddenly shut off. In the reflection of the TV, our rocking chair starts rocking back and forth. She looks over and doesn't find anything. She looks back at the TV and sees a woman in the rocking chair. She checks with her friend to make sure it's real. Yup, that shit's real. WEBM, They nope the fuck out of the living room and go to my sister's room. She leaves me there. Fast forward next day. I wake up in my bed. Ask sister if she carried me. Nope, I let you sleep on the couch lol. Say that it couldn't be true cause I woke up in bed. She tells me the story. After that I couldn't fall asleep unless I had the TV on because I didn't want to feel alone while I slept. I was around 9 or 10 years old, I was in 5th grade. We used to live in a small apartment. The boys sleep in one room and the girls we used to sleep in the bigger room, the master bedroom. The apartment only had one bathroom all the way in the kitchen. So at night, we all make many trips to the bathroom without turning to lights in order not to wake my brothers, and my brothers did the same for us. One night I had to go pee, it was late into the night, I guess around 2 or 3 a.m. As I walked towards the bedroom, I saw a silhouette of someone in the living room sitting facing me. I assume it was my older brother or my dad. As I passed by it had turned to follow me as I walked by. I was half asleep and did not thought much about it. I went pee and head back. As I'm passing by the living room again his head turned as I passed by the room then I say night. No response, I say Dad is that you? Again no response but I know it looking towards my general direction, I say Miguel. Older brother, no response. I got scared and turn on the light to see who was there. The apparition vanishes seconds after I turn on the light but for a small glimpse I saw it. I saw a pale face, dirty hair and facial hair, but the thing that scared me the most was that he did not have eyes. I scream, my dad and my sisters came running to see what is happening. When they get to me, I'm crying and my mom comes and hugs me but I can't make sense. Everyone was scared thinking it was a break-in. I'm pointing at the sofa in the living room but they are struggling to understand what happened. I began to tell them that I saw someone and had no eyes and my dad and mom dismissed as a night terror. But my mom is holding me and tells me everything will be all right. After that night I began waking my mom to accompany me to the bathroom. As time passed one occasion my dad brings that incident to me now as an adult, just to tell me that he witnesses the same ghost in different occasions when we are to live there. Scary shit that happened to you as a kid that you still don't have an explanation for. Being born. Really faint memory. Was around 5-7 yo, rough estimate my memory is absolute dog shit but things like this stay with me forever. Riding in the back of my mom's car with sis, cousin, and aunt in the passenger seat. Starry night, good vibes. Suddenly blinded by a white flash, literally see nothing but white. For about 2 seconds I can hear everyone else screaming and freaking out about it. Then nothing. Everything after that, including basic childhood memories up to my 10th birthday, feel as if they've been erased. Tried many times to ask mom or sis if they remember that night. They deny it outright or just act like I didn't say anything and change the subject. Still have no idea what the light could have been. Never saw or heard of anything similar to it ever again. Have dream that I'm a werewolf. Feel my claws shredding my sheets. Wake up. Sheets are shredded. WTF. No, I didn't have super long finger and toenails. Not strictly paranormal, but here is a story from my adolescence that was a terrifying experience. Be me. 16 at the time, 2009. Lived in this large ex-farmhouse in Poland that was converted into 2 living spaces. The house was about an hour's drive away from the nearest town and the land around it was forested and marshy. My dad worked as a firefighter and usually had to stay overnight in the station, so most days it was my mother and my brother. Now for the actual story. I was messing around in the woods with my brother, 14, as we always did. Find what looked to be a deserted shack in the woods. It had around 20 small glass panes for a window. Target acquired. Og. We start throwing rocks to break the windows because we were retarded kids. Inside there was nothing interesting, hand tools, wood, some coal, and fishing equipment among other things. When we returned home I told my mother about our discovery and what we did. Get my ass handed to me by her because it turned out to be the neighbor's tool shed. A few days later my dad took me to repair those windows. He showed me how to do it on one window and left for work. He left me the panes, sealant, tools, and some food. I had to repair the rest. I think I got about halfway done before it started getting a bit dark and difficult to see. The shed had a light but the bulb wasn't working and I couldn't find a replacement. There was a torch though. Get another 2 done before it was pretty much night time. Yeah, I'll just finish tomorrow. Pack up my things and go home. Spend a suspiciously long time walking with no house in sight. It was big and there definitely would be at least a single light on. Realize that I was lost in a rapidly darkening woods with no survival equipment and only a sweater to keep me warm. Start to backtrack and thankfully manage to find the shed again. Go inside. It's gonna be a little warmer at least. Obviously, the woods aren't silent, birds, insects etc. It might be my memory since this was 11 years ago but I swear that it was completely silent that night. Not even a fucking grasshopper song. That was why when I heard rustling in the woods I jumped. Whatever it was sounded clumsy and large for a forest animal, definitely not a fox or rabbit. Turn off my flashlight and look outside. The moon was bright enough for me to see and the shed was in a sort of clearing. It was a boar family about 20 meters away from the shed, 2 large boars with a group of little ones following. Feel sort of relieved that I know what it was now. Dunno how much time passed but I heard more rustling in the woods. Feel more confident this time since I just expected more boars so I just stood up and looked out. MFW I didn't turn off the flashlight and I was just pointing an extremely bright light towards some potentially dangerous forest animals. Because of the light I don't even see the animals properly. Just 4 pairs of bright glowing eyes staring at me. Heart sinks and I drop back down onto the floor. Remember just feeling pure dread. Thankfully I think they just fucked off. The rest of the night just went pretty boring and mundane until hear the engine of a car driving in the distance. It's still the middle of the night. There is no roads anywhere to my knowledge except the one leading to my house but the sounds came from a different direction. I hear the car for a bit before I assume it drove away since it got quieter. That's about it. I then fell asleep and woke up the next morning. Walked home, ate something, and then went back to repair the rest of the windows. My mother asked me about what happened but I just said that I didn't want to get lost so I slept in the shed. I asked my dad about whether there are any other roads or fields nearby that shed but he said that it's all woodlands. Be young child. Used to love those metal Tonka trucks, pick related. Had like 7 of them. Would line them up in a row in this spot by the swing set when I wasn't playing with them. One day was swinging on the swing. Trucks were behind me. The seat of the swing was plastic and damp and I slipped off it backwards on a backswing. Landed onto the trucks, remember the sound of metal knocking against metal. Parents were outside and come over to see if I'm okay. I get up and don't even feel any pain like it never happened. No explanation, I should have been injured somehow. I landed onto a row of these metal fuckers backwards off a swing from at least 3 or 4 feet up. Never had weird fluke thing like this happen ever again. Both I and my sister have also seen doppelgangers of each other in our childhood home, me passing my sister in the hallway only to find out later she was not home that day, my sister seeing me crouched in the corner of her room at night and waking me up yelling to get out of her room. Our childhood home was not an old house with a history before us. My dad had it built a year before I was born on land he cleared himself. Forgot pick. These trucks were badass. Was home with my mother who was across the house doing laundry. I was playing in a thick blanket on her bed. Suddenly I was trapped in it and couldn't get out. It felt like someone was holding it down around me almost. I almost suffocated in it. I was screaming for help. When I almost fainted, the blanket just kinda loosened up around me, and I just kinda got up out from under it. Mother is still across the house, comes over a minute later and asks if I was yelling for her. I told her I was, but it didn't matter now. I still don't know how I almost suffocated in a blanket or how I just managed to get up from it, if not for some sort of intervention from different sources, or the end of some sort of harassment from a source. When I was a baby, my family's pet rabbit went missing one day and my mother found it later dead in the backyard with its stomach cut open. Because animals didn't usually show up like that, she was weirded out and she took it to a vet and he told her the heart was the only thing missing and the cuts seemed surgical and told her to call the cops. They told her that it could be cultist and it wasn't uncommon in our area and that we needed to be careful. They didn't come out to investigate or anything though. My father was disturbed because our backyard isn't visible from the street, so didn't know how someone saw the rabbit in the first place. I learned that from her years later and she still gets really creeped out remembering it. I was freaked out learning about it because when I was a kid I always felt like I was being watched from my windows which faced the backyard. That was probably just childish paranoia though. Still, the bunny sacrifice thing is not something you can causally bring up in our family, and my parents and siblings never allow animals or kids to hang out back there unsupervised even now. True story. I have had an experience as a child that has haunted me for almost 20 years. I have debated whether to see a hypnotist who can help with lost memory, but I am terrified of what it might be. B10. Grow up in an abusive household. Lots of people coming in and out. Plenty of open drug use. Not sure if it was stress, but some spooky shit happened there. Common haunted house tropes. Parents too drugged out to notice or care. One day get in trouble for something my brother did. Stepdad comes home drunk. Starts screaming and getting in my face about it. Acting like a total dick. Yell back at him he's not my dad and he's just another asshole my mom is dating. Puts me in a chokehold and drags me over to the basement. Pushes me inside and locks the door. Says the boogeyman is going to get me. Turns off light. Stand on the staircase for a while. Fuck it, might as well go turn on the other light so I can at least see. Get to the bottom of the stairs and see the chain hanging. Yank the chain and the basement is dimly lit now. Look at the washer machine and dryer. Trying to find something to do or maybe something to help me get out. At the far end of the basement is a room we use to store stuff. Door slowly creaks open. I turn around and see the white door slowly open. Memory goes blank. Last thing I remember, I'm upstairs with my mom crying and shaking. My shirt is ripped near the collar and my sock is missing. Grandma and Grandpa took me out of the house with my sister till my mom left my stepdad a few years later. A little over 2 years old, visiting my grandparent. Uncle retired from Air Force was also there. Mom had a glass of water with ice. Take a piece of ice without them looking, put it in my mouth and choke on it. Memory is of me is walking to my grandparents' bathroom, looking out their window. Window is about 5 feet up, I'm not even close enough to look out the window. Window is also glazed so you cannot see completely out or inside. While looking out their window I see a black arch above the highway facing the window, in the sky. Something comes floating or flying out of the arch. This alien-looking olive green being comes to the window and speaks to me telepathically. It is not time. Feel this sense of comfort wash over me. Look to the kitchen and I see myself being over the sink, held by my uncle who is trying to dislodge the ice cube I am choking on by patting on my back. Go back to my body to see myself coughing out the ice cube. This memory has stuck with me for nearly 30 years. I cannot explain it, and the visual memory of it is burned into my mind. I remember being in kindergarten and having a fascination with UFOs, aliens, and the paranormal. Who knew elementary school libraries had these types of books? Still don't completely understand why it happened, but that alien's face is so vivid, I wish I could draw it. It was again like I said, dark olive green, 2 eyes, wrinkled around the mouth, 2 holes for nostrils, no ears. Smaller as well. Kind of similar to OP, when I was like 12 or 13, some friends and I were out exploring the woods behind our neighborhood. I lived in the country and it was miles upon miles of woods and farmland back there. We used to find all sorts of cool and creepy shit that would never be found again. There was just so much land back there, and we didn't have any kind of map for any of it. We used to hike several miles no problem back into the woods. Well, one day we came upon a sort of tiny little shack at the top of a hill, deep in the woods. There was some kind of shop or garage operating next to the shack because of all the noise and smoke coming out of this little smokestack type chimney. At the bottom of the hill was a massive pile of butchered animals of some sort. Just blood and gore and dismembered parts. As evidenced by the blood smears on the hillside, whoever lived in that house on the little hill was just tossing butchered animal parts down to the bottom of the hill. Except a stream that ran into the nearby lake where the whole county got its potable water supply was right there. You could see the blood in the water. This person wasn't even trying to keep the carcasses and parts away from the water. As we stood in the trees, hidden, disgusted by this, we see a dude come out of the shop on the hill and he's wearing a fricking massive pig's head completely over his own head. Like, WTF. Shit was terrifying. He was carrying a basket that he dumped down the hill, all assortment of what must have been pig and cow parts rolled down the hill to join the rest of the bloody mess. I still remember the smell, it was unlike anything I've ever come across since. We were so sickened and terrified that we took off running back through the woods in the direction we'd come. One of my idiot friends screamed like a banshee as we took off, and the pigman atop the hill must have heard it for sure. We ran for I don't know how long until we all had to stop to catch our breath. We all stood in the woods trying to figure out WTF we had just seen, and we heard of sort of grunting and turn, and pigman is right there, literally not 100 feet away. Still wearing the pig's head and holding a shotgun in one hand. In the other he's holding on a leash a fricking pig, like the biggest pig I've ever seen. I'm sure it must be my child's mind reimagining it, but that pig must have been the size of a full-grown cow. And it had fricking sharp teeth like a dog's. It was sniffing around like a dog, as if the pigman was using it to track us. We fricking found a second wind and bolted and didn't stop till we reached one of our friends' houses. We told his parents, who straight up laughed in our faces, but we insisted so strongly that they call the police that they did. I went home from there and told my own parents everything. They didn't laugh at me and seemed genuinely concerned. Later that evening a single cop showed up to my parents' house and I explained everything. I remember the cop showing no sign that he was disgusted or intrigued at all, and I found that odd. He didn't give any sort of feedback and ended up leaving, saying he'd let us know what they find, or whatever bullshit. I knew then this wasn't right, I had just told him about a dude wearing a pig's head with a shotgun and some sort of monster on a leash and how they had chased kids through the woods and the cop acts like it's no big deal. A few days later the same cop shows back up to my parents' house threatening to arrest me for trespassing and making up lies about being chased through the woods. He tells me don't ever go back into the woods again and that he should arrest me for trespassing onto farmer property. When my parents asked what they had found out, the cop immediately says no place like that exists and accused me and my friends of making it all up. It ended at that and we never found that place again despite trying to take pics. I remember the whole ordeal vividly. I'm 35 now, and my guess is it was someone important in the local community. Possibly a judge, cop, DA, town board member, etc. Posted this before. Once I saw a hobo with his anus exploded. Could see what appears to be his ribs. He was lying in the sidewalk, pants down, and in front of his ass was this trail of blood and feces. The smell was awful. Actually, we felt that long before we saw the body. My friends and I came to the conclusion that it was some kind of vendetta between hobos where the guy had fireworks shoved in his ass. The most spooky thing is that 5 minutes later we walked the same path again and he had vanished. Probably emergency service collect his body, but the trail was still there, the shape around where his body was. Not paranormal but pretty spooky for a kid. Be like 9 or 10. Hot as hell during the summer but I like playing outside. I go out around 8 or 9 at night, a little bit into dusk when it's cool. No other kids out that late so I just walk around and look at the houses in my suburb. About every 3 nights there'd be a light following me. It would start from about 30 feet away and follow at that distance, but wouldn't back away if I would get closer. First few times of this it doesn't even register in my mind how weird it is. I can't even remember the thought process that would have justified it not being worrying. About the 4th or 5th time it happens I decide to approach it. As I walk up the light shines in my eyes and I can't see where it's coming from. Like getting a light shined in your face and you can't see the source of the light. Walk directly over and then behind where the light was coming from. Nothing. Turn around, light gone. Like it was just floating there or some shit, I have no idea. Sometimes it would flicker a little, sometimes it would sway back and forth. If I was on the move away from it, it followed in a perfectly straight path, not turning for the road or obstacles. When I was 12, maybe 13, I was sleeping over at my dad's house, and every house my dad's had has always given me weird vibes, nothing specific, just that weird feeling. Anyway, I'm sleeping in my bed, and I still don't know if I woke up or dreamed this, but I get up from my bed and hear a voice from outside my bedroom door saying, "Get a knife, get the knife," in a paranoid female voice, but sounded very angelic. I just stand in front of my door paralyzed with fear for about 20 seconds, while the voice continues, then I wake up, but in my dad's bedroom with a little air mattress set up for me, even though I had fell asleep in my room and have no memory of going to go sleep in my dad's room. Have no clue what happened still. Had a similar experience, bizarrely. About 12. Grandma passes away. Start hearing music box coming from nowhere. Search the entire house, check every music box we own, it's never the melody I hear. After a couple months I start getting into those stupid ghost hunting shows. Decide to take out my phone and attempt to record an EVP session. When I go to play the recording back, it's completely silent, not even my voice is caught. WTF, WTF, WTF. Get scared and ask it to stop. Have never heard it again. Sometimes I think it was just my grandma playing a music box for me. If ghosts really do exist, and I feel a little bad for asking her to stop. Not the most exciting story, but it's what I've got. Gonna jump off of yours for the related shitty abusive parents theme. Never told this story before. Be me, maybe 7 to 8 years old? Abusive poorfug home. Mom's boyfriend is grooming me for sexual abuse, although I obviously didn't know it at the time. Wake up middle of the night, need a glass of water. House layout is bedroom's living room, more like a couch in a hallway, kitchen. There's something on the couch. It's some kind of animal, crouched down, hissing and growling at me. Long body, maybe 3 feet long, looks black in the darkness, reflective yellow eyes, short face, doesn't have any ears. Closest thing it looked like was maybe a demonic river otter. Noped out, not passing that thing to get to kitchen. Tell my mom's boyfriend about it the next morning. LOL, that's impossible. Anon, I slept on the couch last night. Scared the hell out of me, but maybe it saved me from the kind of bad nights that came later. IDK. Be me 6 years old, living in Russia. Went to nearest small river or spring. Time about 10 p.m. Approaching spring, hear woman cries. Or wailings. Or woman's song. Or something in between. Didn't care, walking further. Wailings don't stop. Suddenly see a gray figure. Shroud covers head, back, thighs and feet are bare. No face, only white skull. Walking in front of me, from left to right direction. Me being scared ASF and run away. The hell did I saw those time? A banshee? P.S. Sorry for mistakes, English is not my native. Play all those gay mirror games with the neighbor kids. Light as a feather, Bloody Mary, Candyman, Keck, and eventually me and this girl both saw 3 shadows rising out of the bathtub in the bathroom with the lights out. That night things kept falling off my walls and a dresser fell in my kitchen. Also a number kept calling me and hanging up. Our caller ID said the last 3 numbers were 666. I called the number back and reached a middle-aged woman. She calmly told me no one was calling my house but was randomly disconnected. I never really messed with dumb shit like that again. Also, I swear for 6 to 12 months whenever I was alone I'd see one of those black shapes form in the dark. Do you think it's all coincidences, Anons? Age 12. Have bedroom in the attic. Our attic was newly renovated with insulation so the cold didn't get in. Sleepwalked a lot at the time. Usually I would have my route down the ladder and 25 steps on the stairway down to the front door, into the kitchen and then back up to sleep. One night I slipped down the ladder, the drop is almost 3.5 meters, fall down and roll backwards down the 25 stairs. My parents had almost an heart attack, but nothing happened. Woke up the next day with not even a scratch. I've lived a crazy life fighting demons and evil spirits, and it started around 10 years old. It all stems from my mother. She is a lying, master manipulator. And possessed by a lot of demons. Which of course came after me constantly. So I have so many stories. BTW, I only realized all this later. As a child I was tortured relentlessly. Only way to handle her is become the demons, which I did. Now I've beat them all, and I'm master of darkness. I don't know how to feel about that. I'm going to try and reform and summon good things instead of demons. Which I am damn good at, lol. I'm basically a lord of hell at this point. But I am only realizing this as I heal and see more of why I'm so fricked up. Anyways, for some tame stories. Go to grandma's house, I immediately see a spirit. It has the head of a snake and it's hissing at me. I throw energy at it, and it runs away to under the sink, and I can't sense his energy down there. I tell GMA about this, and she says it's her guardian angel, with the snake head. Okay. Landlord later confirms multiple ghost stories from tenants. Later on, living with sane but beta loser dad. Long story short, one day I see a dude with a noose around his neck for a second. I ask the landlord if anyone hung themselves down in my apartment. He confirms they did, but was freaked that I knew. TLDR, imagination is real, science lies. It's really your subconscious, and if you listen to it you may be surprised. Because I could have chalked all that to imagination, but yet it's confirmed. I have so many stories like this though. Everyone experiences shit like this but is just like imagination, lol. Magic is in your life already, FFS. Nice LARP anon, but I think it's time for your meds. Around 5 or 6, staying with aunt and uncle. Sleeping in the guest room with family, we were in the process of moving to the same town. Notice 2 blue eyes, or I guess maybe orbs, flying around. Mom just dismisses it as their dog while she's half asleep, ignoring me. 15. Live in the middle nowhere. Have to walk a mile on a dirt road to get home. Around 12 a.m. hour. Nearing my house. Spot a old woman standing under light pole at a distance. Shit ain't right. She stares at me as I pass by her. I look over my shoulder. She's turned facing me, under the light pole, watching me. Run home. Lock the front gate. Lock the front door. The door has a glass panel. Turn off all the lights. Sit down with my back leaned against the door. Shit ain't right again. Turn around to watch the gate. Old woman is standing in front of my gate. She fiddles with the lock pad for a while. Looks at the door. Turns around and walks away into the darkness. I never got home late after that shit. 80s. Having a senior moment one night. Don't know where I am or how to get home. See a young man walking, wondering if I should ask for help. Right when I decide to do so, he notices me, screams like a little girl and runs away. Follow him because I really need help. Can see him through his door. I know he sees me, but he's just crying and wetting himself. Try to get in to see if maybe his parents can help me, but it's no use. Get left out in the cold after midnight because a young man was terrified of a harmless old lady. This one is more of a story involving my friend. I've shared this before, and no one ever responds. Probably because it sounds fake and gay, but I remember it pretty vividly. Little kid, spending the night at my friend's place. Wake up in the middle of the night and see his, much older, sister in the room. She looks seriously spooked and is looking out the window. Hear my friend in his bed crying, and he asks, "Is he back?" I look at the window, but I'm sleeping on the floor so I can't see outside. See a weird shadow move past the window. Friend and his sister scream bloody murder and the parents walk in. Friend's sister claims the little man is back. Their parents give each other a weird look and try to tell them they're imagining things. Blah blah blah, go back to bed. I'm little and tired, so even with all the commotion, I fall back asleep. Next day my friend tells me all about the little man. He and his sister were in the backyard one day playing cards when suddenly his sister freezes. She's staring at something behind my friend. He watches her face go from confused to a mixture of disgusted and scared. She jumps up and screams and tells him to run inside. He does, but as he's running he looks back and sees a little man, even smaller than he was at the time, 10 years old. It's moving quickly, but kinda waddling or swinging like it has a limp. They run inside and tell their parents, but they think they're just playing a prank. Later, friend's sister tells him that she watched the little man walk out from a hole in the ground. Me. 2 to 3 years old. In bedroom. Start pointing at window. Moo moo. Moo moo. Ghost, ghost, in Tagalog. Mom sees nothing in the window. Grabs me and sprints out the room. Me, 8. Shit scared of Bloody Mary, keep seeing spooky shit in mirrors. One night zone out and stare into the mirror. While zones out, raise arm up and slice face with thumbnail without thinking. Wake up a bit and no bout. Your story reminds me of the time I used to live with my grandparents. A lot happened there, but I want to tell the part similar to your theme. I'll write more parts later. Everywhere my grandpa lived, some beings followed. Over time I came to realize a witch is stalking him. In fact, I remember my mom telling me about a witch a few times. But being so young, I didn't really know what that meant. My only experience with witches at that point was a TV show called Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Anyway, this home I lived in was hexed simply because Grandpa lived there. I saw many things. From shadow people to Satan. This particular incident is about the living room couch. My grandma is diabetic, which means she can't really hold in any pee. She also can't resist the urge to drink water. So when the urge came about at, say 1 a.m., she has to go. She has to go through the most haunted area of the house if she wants any juice, the corridor. Rather than going alone, she woke me up. I was just an elementary boy. And unlucky. She didn't want to wake up Grandpa because he had work at 5 in the morning. She grabbed my hand and off we went. At these times we made it to the kitchen with no issues. As soon as we arrived, Grandma turned on the lights. She grabbed some orange juice, then went to the bathroom. It all took like 3 minutes. From the kitchen you have access to the living room. From the entrance you can see most of it, if the lights are on. Standing to the left of the fridge I could see the big couch. Laying on the couch was a black figure. Every time, and I mean every time I noticed it, he would raise his head and glance at me. This happened every night. The pattern was always the same. He would raise his head and then attempt to sit up. He would fail a few times. He would then finally use his elbows to support his weight. His spine was at a 45-degree angle or so he wasn't fully sitting. He just wanted to stare back at me, it seems. I call it a he, because he didn't have long hair. During these stare-downs I always tried to identify him. I thought maybe it was my uncle who also lived with us. I began to feel bad, at first. Grandma turning the kitchen lights on kept waking him up. But then I realized, Uncle had a rectangle head. This figure had an oval. Eventually Grandma noticed, after a few days of this, that I kept contacting this shadow figure. She noticed me always staring at the same direction. She saw the figure with its elbows keeping it up. She gasped and exclaimed that I should never look at those creatures. She then said we urgently need to go back to our room. As soon as she grabbed me to push me towards the corridor, that figure jerked its body. It was now sitting on the couch rather than laying. Feet and legs off the couch and on the carpet. His body facing the TV. Except his back was hunched. His body language seemed defeated/depressed. We left in such a hurry that Grandma didn't even turn the light off on departure like she usually did. Ever since then that figure began a new pattern. After sitting up with its elbow, he would eventually turn his body to just sit properly but in a slumped position. Feet planted on the floor. That thing was like a timer. When he sat upright, it was time for Grandma to finish drinking and leave. This lasted a few days. On the final day he stood up. Body straight like a soldier. I say final day because that was the last time I saw anything in the living room. Grandma's diabetes did not cure overnight, however. She still needed to go grab a sip of Kool-Aid. We took the same route, the only route. Through the corridor we went. This night was different. There was some light in the corridor, leaking for the small opening under the bathroom door. Someone was showering at this hour. I was relieved because it made me feel less lonely. To the left of the bathroom is the kitchen containing our Targa fridge. Grandma offered me a glass of water that night. I remember that night so well. No shadow man in sight. As we return, I am feeling more confident. We enter the corridor one step. I stop and ask Grandma who is in the bathroom. She did not fully get to finish her sentence. I don't. We hear a squeak. The shower knob turned, turning off the water. Then a swift brush of the shower curtain. Wet footsteps running towards the door. Tith 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 tith. It all happened in 1 second. This shadow behemoth violently turned the doorknob and opened the door. I only saw a glimpse of it before it turned off the light. It moved right in front of our path. It was not the shadow man from the living room. This thing was massive, but still a shadow creature. All black, no face. It was so white as if 3 fully grown men shared the same shirt. This thing had long hair as well. Massive head to go along with its massive body. I notice part of its right arm, the arm that flipped the light switch, was still in the bathroom, but the bathroom door was mostly closed. Maybe an inch open. This confirmed the shadow was, well, a shadow. Paper thin but so wide. As my night vision adjusted, I noticed it grab its locks. It pulled on it to the point where its head slightly cocked to the right. I hung on to Grandma, who just looked so small in comparison. Her diabetes rendered her short and thin. She was easily 1/6 the size of this thing in front of us. This thing was way bigger than the couched shadow man. The shadow man from the living room was normal adult-sized. Bigger than Grandma but not superhuman. Since this mass was blocking the way to the bedroom, there was no sleeping there tonight. After standing there feeling too afraid to move, let alone scream, Grandma turned us around. We went past the kitchen and into the living room. I glanced at the couch, saw nothing. I didn't dare look behind me to see if the big thing followed. Grandma took me past the front door and outside. We had a few chairs on the front porch. We sat there just in silence. I assumed we would just sit here until sun up. Maybe even sleep there. Grandma is diabetic and needs proper sleep though. She took us into Grandpa's van and reclined the seat. We slept in the van after all. I'm just glad we didn't sleep in the living room. Next day I had time to collect my thoughts. Grandma hated discussing the paranormal, so she wouldn't answer any questions. Grandpa always gave the same response: don't worry. Just ignore them. I only had myself. That mass from last night seemed familiar, I thought. It took a bit of pondering, but I eventually figured it out. Down the road is a hair salon. It has its own towering advertisement, like how McDonald's has its own big M sign. On that salon sign was a simple shaded drawing of a woman. Its hair was very similar to that of the shadow behemoth. As if the shadow monster copied it and failed, ending up instead with a corrupted version. This made me shiver. Did the spirits leave the house and made it down the road? Or did they join us for a car ride? How did they become aware of that image? A battery-powered toy gun starts to work even without batteries. A battery fire truck activates every time I died in Donkey Kong on SNES. Street lights flicker for me everywhere. Looking out my window instead of going to sleep. Watching airplanes go by. One is different. It's moving oddly, horizontal across the sky, not laterally like the others have been. It gets halfway across the sky. Breaks into smaller lights that seem to spread out on their own. Weird shit happened to me when I was really young. We were attending some Smurfs themed festival, something we used to do a lot in kindergarten. Be me. 6 or so. We were attending a festival at a playground, which was not far from school. We have to dress up as Smurfs or some shit. Mom drives me over. Dance to Captain Jack. Wait for Mom to come back. Drive home. When we were heading home, I remember seeing a woman choking a child who bared the same costume that I had. Surprisingly, the woman was also in a Smurf costume. And that's that. I don't know what the hell happened to that kid or anything about him. Pic related. Told this before probably, but it's real and traumatized me, but not as much as some other people in the thread. You guys have messed up stories. Me, 7 years old. Wake up in middle of the night spooked. Get up and try to turn on my bedroom lights from the switch by the door. Doesn't work. Door is closed unusually. Try to open it and it won't budge. Fricking red alert. Door doesn't have a lock. Does not compute. Feel presence in room with me watching me from the darkness. I twist the doorknob and push and pull and it doesn't work. I start really panicking like I'm about to die and bash on the door constantly like I think it would break down. I scream and yell and keep hitting the door and nobody hears me. House is 1 story with nearby bedrooms. Keep doing this until I'm mentally and physically drained. Only thing I know to do now is to slink back into my bed and hide under the covers. I crawl back into bed with my head down and eyes shut and pass out very quickly. Wake up in the morning and door is open, nobody heard anything. Go on being a child with a random paranormal experience and forget about it most of the time. I've had other paranormal experiences, but they tend to happen every 5 years or so. A lot of grandma house stories, so I'll add my own. To be exact, my great-grandmother's house. So my great-grandmother when she was alive used to live in a Dutch colonial house in Southeast Asia, Pic related. This was back in the mid-90s, a few years before she passed away at the age of 98. She used to live in this sizable property only with one of her daughters who never married, my grand-aunt, and one local helper to take care of the house. The layout of the house itself is shaped like 2-letter L piled on top of each other where the top L is inverted. So there's a small courtyard in the middle of the building. My dad recently told me that they at one point explored ways for the house to be recognized as a local heritage site because frankly houses like these are becoming extinct in the city that I lived in. So it really has that old-timey, nostalgic, and creepiness factor. From my earliest memory of visiting her when I was a kid, maybe from when I was 4 or 5, I never felt right in that house. It wasn't until I was doing my undergraduate studies, my grand-aunt still lived there, alone after my great-grandma passed, that I had enough courage to explore the house in its entirety. And we usually have family gatherings there at least 3 times a year. When I was a kid, I would always dread going to this house. If we were in the house and dusk is about to come, I would kick up a fuss of wanting to go home. One time, my dad proposed of us spending the night to keep my great-grandma and grand-aunt company, and I remembered I cried wanting to go home. It was something about the layout of the house, the smell, the hodgepodge of colonial artifacts and paintings, the slightly hidden rooms and corridors, and not to mention the weird vibes I keep getting from random corners of the house. Worst of all, there's a big well at the very back of the house, near the kitchen and the helper's room. So this well has always been a point of fascination for myself since I was little. Whenever I think of that house, the well is usually the second thing that comes to mind after the house itself. The well hasn't been used for God knows how long and is always covered up tightly by rather thick wooden planks with a square-shaped hatch that you can open on one side of the well. Of the times I went near the well, I always remember it to be closed and padlocked, probably to prevent us grandkids to play around there and fall into it. Now this is where it gets interesting. One day when I was in 5th or 6th grade, we had a family gathering at the house, in the middle of the day for lunch. Almost everybody in my extended family from my dad's side was there. Both my dad's parents had already passed, so they were the only notable people missing. My great-grandma outlived them both. So in broad daylight after lunch, I was playing and talking like 6th graders with my brother and 2 of my other cousins. We were in the dining room that has a door that leads into the courtyard, and once you step out of the door, there is an outside corridor with the toilet, kitchen, helper's room, one mystery room to the right, and the well at the very end of the corridor. At one point little me needed to go piss, so I had to go to the toilet outside as it was the closest. As I stepped out, I remember that one of my aunts was in the kitchen with the helper because I passed them and saw them preparing something. Went into the old toilet that also gave the creeps, did my business and quickly stepped out again. At that moment, something just told me, or the voice in my head told me, to look right towards the well. Lo and behold, the hatch that was supposed to be closed and locked was noticeably open. Being slightly adventurous and curious, I opted to approach the well and wanted to see it myself, and wanted to see just what's inside that well that has been a source of curiosity. As I approached the well, I remembered feeling this sensation as if a gust is coming from inside the well. As I stood right beside the well, I mustered up any courage I had and peeked into the hatch. Nothing. Just pitch black, smelled musty, damp, and nothing else remarkable. So I withdrew my head from the hatch and just stood there by the well for a good minute or so, just taking in the atmosphere of being there, at a location where I've never had the courage to go before. Shortly after, my aunt, who was in the kitchen, noticed me standing there, called out my name, and approached me. She wanted to know what I was doing there, so naturally I told her I wanted to see what's inside the well. As she was walking towards me, she muttered out something along the lines of nothing good or nothing worthwhile. When she finally got to me, her face changed to that of surprise. She asked me why the hatch is open and gives me a minute lecture on how dangerous it can be. I could tell that she was struck by the fact the hatch was actually open. As she herded me back into the dining room, she talked with the house helper in a stern tone, telling her that the hatch is open, asked the helper in somewhat of a panicky "Why is it open?" and asked that the helper close the hatch again. The helper was as puzzled as we were. She told my aunt that she hasn't been near the well for days. That's when my aunt's face started to turn pale. I knew that something was not right as how they should be. As that realization set in, without much thought I just shot a question to my aunt about the well. Mind you, we were still in the kitchen, so it was just the 3 of us. I asked her, "What's up with that well?" My aunt was rather hesitant, but she figured I was big enough to understand. It was then she told me that the family believes there is something, some energy, being, or spirit that dwells in the depths of the well. And she said whatever's in there, is attached to our family. Weird side note, I already wrote a long continuation of the story, and the text erased itself as I was about to post it. Anyways, as we were just finishing up the story, we heard the sound. Clack clack clack. My aunt stepped out of the kitchen and she just froze in place. I came out to where she was standing and gazed towards wherever she was looking. The goddamn hatch was now closed. WTF. My aunt motioned for the house helper to come look and commanded her to find the key to the padlock and lock it up again. A few seconds after, one of my uncles came out of the dining room wanting to go to the toilet. He was wondering what we were up to there. My aunt simply replied, "It's the damn well again." My interest piqued. I asked, "Again?" My uncle, being the joker that he is, replied, "It has a thing for kids." You see, anons, all of my aunts and uncles, including my dad, had lived in this house a number of years as they were growing up. At that moment, my uncle began reminiscing with my aunt about the time he saw a figure staring at the well only for it to disappear when he caused a commotion by calling out his other siblings. My aunt then replied with a story of her own, about when she once was going the outside toilet in the middle of the day and saw the well area being darker than the rest of the outdoor area. Apparently, a number of weird happenings have occurred related to the well. Clothes, cards, and decorations from the house were found around the well that were not supposed to be there. After a moment of storytelling, my uncle called out my dad, who was in the dining room, telling him that I had just experienced the well. My dad just laughed and tried to calm me down. He casually mentions that one of his cousins almost fell into well in the 70s and that's why they boarded up the well. He also said they thought about destroying the well and burying it, but my great-grandma opposed to the idea. I wish that with all the people outside now, it was the end of the weird encounter that day. Maybe it was my heightened sense of fear or curiosity, I kept having bad vibes from the direction of the well. My aunt went back into the kitchen, my uncle went in and out of the toilet, the house helper found the key and locked the hatch again, while my dad and I walked around the courtyard. He introduced me to his former room, across the courtyard from the kitchen. We went in and it was evident nobody has been living in there for years probably. It was all dusted up, there were stacks of old books and magazines, and there was the unmistakable smell of mold, I think. As we were in there, my mind was still fixated on the well. I threw glances every few seconds just to be sure it was actually closed. What I didn't expect was that something was brewing in the room as well. As my dad began to step out the door into the courtyard, I trailed him by 2 or 3 seconds, and that's when I heard like either a murmur or a faint sob from inside the room. Writing this still makes me shiver. I turned around, looked around the room, and my eye became fixated on this chest that was in one corner of the room. Thinking I had enough excitement for one day, I tried to brush it off and walked right out of there without looking back. Didn't even tell my dad. So yeah, that's my story. Today, the family is still trying to sell the house. My grand aunt is now living with one of her sisters. But from the stories I've heard, it's as if the house does not want to sever ties with our family. There have been numerous attempts at renovating it and cleaning it from its clutter, but there are always weird occurrences going on in each of the attempts. Even now, as I'm living on the other side of the world, memories and images of that house are always vivid. I haven't been in there for almost a decade now, but there's always a part of me that wants to go back and explore. My brother's a smart guy, but he comes out with the weirdest paranormal shit that he sees in such a blasé manner. Yet I won't go in that room. The girl with the slits for a face is in there. Now you can have the hotel bed facing the mirror. I'm not letting my soul out. It's under my bed again. I'll go to bed when it's gone. It's just added seamlessly to conversations. He isn't even a schizo or something, actually successful and sociable. When I was a toddler, I spoke to and played games with my dead grandma a lot, and also had night terrors. Between like 12 to 15 it wasn't scary, but I would have visions and such, like really intense ones, being half awake in the middle of the night. I once physically felt an entity touch me as a result of this, though it wasn't the one that basically harassed me sexually in my dreams and visions until I liked it, so that was wild. Also, while this stuff isn't me, my dad's side of the family has a history of encountering weird shit in the woods. My dad swears on his life that he's encountered something unnatural in the forest. It made a whooping sound and threw a boulder into the creek he was at, plus really upset his dog, and my mother, who was nearby, confirms it. My brother also had a kinda similar experience. He was out hunting with some of his friends, and while they were out in a field, the whole forest just went completely silent for a bit before they all heard what he described as a really loud helicopter sound, but slowed way down and deep, making their chests vibrate, but the noise never came back after the first time it was made. Okay. I'm a pretty bad storyteller, so here we go. Some background. I used to live with my mother in the Welsh valleys, in a dead-end town in the middle of nowhere. Nearby is a forest that climbs higher and higher into the mountains, which leads to plateau plains, which leads into a very large forest, which will be the topic of the story. These forests scare my mother, who is deeply spiritual. She insists there's cults or some sort of ape creature living there. 19. Me and my friend want to go camping in this large forest. Have tent and provisions prepared. My mother is very upset and doesn't want us to go, practically begging us not to go. There's something up there, Anon, please don't go. Laugh at her and insist we will be fine and nothing weird would happen. We were very wrong. We spend about an hour and a half trekking to the forest. We walk around a bit to try to find a good spot. We had never been here before. The first thing that's weird is, previous pic. It looks like a car had crashed into a tiny little shanty town/house. There isn't any roads around. Okay, well that's strange. We keep walking and come to a spot, pic related. It's beautiful and has a very magical feeling to the place. We set up camp and have a good time making a little campfire and cooking food and listening to music. It's around 7:30 p.m., and it's starting to get dark. We get into the tent and try to get some sleep. Neither of us are very tired, so we keep talking. Hey man, so blah. There's a twig breaking quite close, sounding like it's coming from the cliffs above us, previous pic. We look each other in the eyes and we're like, that was weird. We keep trying to talk, but every time we talk we are interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Every time we stop talking, the footsteps stop. It's now getting very close. We look each other in the eyes and hold the silence for 30 seconds. Very loud ape-like sound comes from the opposite direction, the sound extremely inhuman, and sounded like an ape. We both look each other in the eyes. We're freaking leaving, and abandoning our tent and everything, screw it. We get our shoes on as soon as possible, and start walking back in the near pitch black darkness. I use my phone as a torch, it had 10% battery left, so we needed to get back as soon as possible. We get lost and take the wrong path to a dead end. Voices from all directions start making the same inhuman voices at different times, like they're communicating to each other. Officially terrified. We start running in the opposite direction and find the path that lead back to town. We head up the path and reach the plateau, and we feel safe. Not much happened on the way back home apart from 100 sheep blocking the way to the forest leading to town. When I got home, my mother was so relieved that I got home. Apparently she had been crying all day and knew something bad was going to happen. When we went back to get the tent, everything was untouched. If anyone wants to hear any more stories, I don't mind. Okay, I'll rattle off a couple of short ones. 7 to 8. living in a different place in West Wales with my mother and sister. Out of the corner of my eyes I keep seeing a little girl in a white dress when I'm coming down the stairs quite often. My mom asks me if I've seen any spirits that look like a little girl with a white dress. Say yes, we've both seen her. Hatman. 10. Sleeping on the couch watching TV. Feel a presence. Look over my shoulder behind the couch. A very tall shadow person with a hat is staring into my soul. He doesn't move and I can see him as clear as day. My only reaction is to bury my head into the covers until I pass out from exhaustion. Tell my mother what I've seen. She says she's seen him too, and many others in my family, who aren't into spooky stuff, have seen him too. I shrugged the hatman experience off as I got older as hypnagogia, but a couple of years ago whilst I was scrolling /x/ I saw an image posted very similar to pic related and I was overcome with pure terror, like a deer caught in the headlights of a car. How can all these people imagine the same exact person? A side note, my mother has had a lot of paranormal experiences too, some of them are very dark but I don't remember them. Here's a tiny psychic story. My mother is at a bar with my ex-stepfather. Guy comes over that knows my stepfather, introduces himself. My mother explains that she sometimes reads palms, and he asks to get his read. She says, I know this sounds weird, but you have a big scar around, points where the scar is on herself, here on your abdomen. The guy goes white as a sheet, takes my stepfather to the bathroom. The guy is like, what the hell bro, how the hell did she freaking know I had this scar? And shows him the scar exactly where my mother said. Japanese Ghost Part 1. When I lived in Japan, 2006 to 2008, an intriguing thing happened to me. Almost every night around midnight I would return from my job in Shinjuku, buy a beer and walk around the nearby park. By the end of the second year I had grown into the pleasant habit of talking to myself. In Japan they call it hitarigato. I preferred to walk in the darkest parts of the woods and had my favorite places to walk and express my thoughts. Late one particularly lonely night my phone suddenly vibrated. I looked and saw there was a message from an unknown number. Funny, I thought, why didn't it ring? The message was at first the sound or air, some silence, and then an unfamiliar woman spoke in a thin whispering dry hushed voice. She simply said, I see you, can you see me? Japanese Ghost Story Part 2. At first, I thought it must have been a prank. I looked around but I was totally alone in the dark. I immediately tried to call the number back but it just rang. I decided to walk back towards the entrance where people sometimes gathered. I tried the number again and to my surprise, the pay phone next to me rang. It had to be someone in the park, but who? The next day I called my students and friends but nobody. One student of mine, intrigued, asked to listen to the message, and upon listening became deeply concerned, saying the voice was a hungry/jealous ghost, a famous one that lived in Inokashira Park, one that feeds on sadness and loneliness. I kind of nervously laughed it off, saying something like, so do ghosts have fingers to dial phones? But admittedly the idea started to get under my skin. That following week I told this story to my English class and they begged to hear the message, so I passed my phone around to a group of middle-aged women who all agreed it was a ghost. One student was so shocked that she begged me to visit a nearby Shinto priest to get the spirit removed from me. Other students were worried it followed me home, asking questions like, how fast did you ride your bike home? And did you have an open umbrella that night? Apparently, Japanese ghosts are technologically savvy, have speed limits, and can travel inside objects like umbrellas. I later played the message for one of my closest friends, who told me with some seriousness that although he doesn't technically believe in ghosts that it wouldn't be a bad idea, to go to a nearby Shinto shrine and deal with it. Which I did. Japanese Ghost Story Part 3. I sometimes still think about that message. I don't believe in this kind of physical ghost, but the story is too eerie, too strange to forget. I still have that old phone, but I'm not sure if the message is stored on my phone or the server. If it's on the phone, I'll try to get it out, but I think I need a PC with a special program. Anyway, that's my Japanese ghost story. It's too good not to share. I was 6 or 7, late 80s early 90s, St. Louis County, MO, and sleeping in my room. Woke up in the middle of the night to a loud thunderstorm. Wanting to see the lightning and how hard it was raining, I peeked out the blinds. In front of the bedroom window was a mushroom-shaped pine bush. Under it, huddled away from the rain, I can only describe as a baby chimpanzee. I immediately dropped the blinds and jumped back in bed. I remember telling my mom and sisters about the monkey under the bush the next day. Also had a dream where I thought I was reborn and woke up like I landed in the body, at the same age. Remember looking at my arms and wonder that I had arms, no clue. Me 11. Sitting in kitchen at dining table, talking to my mom while she makes dinner. In the middle of the conversation, experience lost time. From my perspective, everything just jumps to 5 to 10 minutes into the future. No idea what happened, but mom is no longer in the kitchen. Leave like nothing happened. This continues to happen while we're living in that house. I would lose hours and have no idea what was happening. Once I was in the process of walking to my bed only for it to suddenly become morning. I was standing in front of my bed, even my clothes were the same. No memory of getting dressed or going to sleep. Years later, my mother talks to me about the kitchen event. Apparently, from her perspective, at the exact moment I perceived the lost time, I faded out of existence. She described it like I became static on a television screen. I literally just faded away. She panicked and ran throughout the home looking for me, only for me to reappear a few minutes later in the exact same spot I'd disappeared. This happened a few more times, my mother witnessing it. Each time was almost exactly the same, with me fading out like TV static. Stopped when we moved out of the house. No idea what happened. Don't know what to make of my mother's stories either. Apparently shit like this happened all the time when I was a kid. My mom thinks the paranormal is attracted to me. Long time lurker. First time poster. I read going through /x/ for the past 10 to 11 years now. Love these type of threads. The story that I will tell is 100% real. When I was 7 to 8 years old, we moved from the Bay Area, CA, to the Central Valley of CA. Regular small home in the suburbs, nothing out of the ordinary. It's been a few months living there now, nothing has happened. Me in bed one night, can't go to sleep. Eyes open. My door is open to the hallway. Out in the hallway is an amber color night light. Pretty bright. My face is facing towards the door/hallway. Out of nowhere, I see these alien-shaped figures. One tall and one small alien figure. Green glow and huge black eyes. I was frickin' startled and scared. I turned my head away from the door and faced my window, which had a drape. I can see the green glow off the window drape. I closed my eyes and slept through the night. Mind you, I didn't know WTF an alien was or seen one before at that age. I later found out what I thought I saw. I am certain, I was not dreaming or hallucinating. I was wide awake at the time. I wonder how many ghost sightings are just people who take Benadryl and aren't used to it or have a delayed reaction or something. Me about 15 in high school. Have bad acid reflux and random shitty health problems that are really just annoying, not serious. Have to take a bunch of pills every morning. Being a who gives a shit teen, I stopped taking them after a short time. Anyway, one of the meds is promethazine, causes drowsiness. One day take some Benadryl before bed because my nose was itching. If you know how bad the pollen gets in SC, you'll be able to sympathize. The next morning take some Benadryl before school. While on bus, get hit with crazy reaction to the Benadryl. Feel drunkish and sedated. On school bus, start seeing crazy shadow people running up and down the aisle. They're broad-shouldered and walk in a menacing way, like when someone is walking up another person to punch them. Kind of like a strut with their shoulders kind of swinging back and forth. Very spooky, but I know what's going on. Later at school, feel more sedated, so go to nurse's office. She knows I'm on meds that can make you sleepy, so she just calls my grandpa to come get me, and lets me chill on one of the 2 doctor beds. While waiting, I go into full-on visual and auditory hallucinations. See completely new people I've never met. Have conversations with them. See more shadow people doing a weird crouched run. Probably lots of stuff I don't remember too. It all basically stopped when I got home, so that was cool. I feel like this type of situation could be responsible for at least some of these instances. Sorry I don't have a real story, but, man, if you ever want to get really screwed up and hallucinate, Benadryl will hit you up. Hopefully we don't. 404. I am the Anon with the grandpa who is stalked by a witch. So much happened, but I will pick just one more story to tell, at least until the next thread. I wasn't sure which part to tell until I reread my posts. I will tell the part about grandpa getting kicked out of his own son's home. First, a little backstory. These creatures that haunted my grandpa and his children, including my mom, have been around since before I was even born. For example, when I saw them for the first time, I thought it was a new discovery. They were dormant for a few years until the month the shadow people attacked me. I know because I lived in that address for a year or 2 with no interaction. And then they came. My mom visited and saw them. She didn't even flinch. She just nodded and then told me to just stay away from them. Her sister, who was a teen at the time, was used to their presence as well. She just laughed and taunted the spirits, often whistling at them to get their attention, treating them like dogs. Grandpa also never flinched at their presence. In fact, I've seen him punch one of them. Moving on, the reason we moved out of the home with Shadow Couch Man is because a couple months later violence escalated. Grandpa and his son, not my dad, pooled money together to find a bigger place. The mortgage was under Grandpa's name for some reason. So he had the power to kick Grandpa out. The first month they moved into the new house, I was excited. They had such a big lawn, I dreamt of a tree house and camping in the backyard. I moved in with Mom, so I didn't live there, but still. Parents brought me over for a visit and I began to play with Uncle's daughter who was my age. We played tag and stuff. While playing, I saw from the corner of my eye black lumps on the grass. Gradually I began to make out the shapes. Those lumps were actually snakes. The second I looked at their direction, they began to sink and vanished after a few seconds. They were pretty big, like the size of an adult man's arm. At the time I didn't know snakes were venomous, so I went to inspect carelessly. I assumed they lived in holes, which would explain them disappearing. But I found no openings or mini tunnels. I didn't think much of it. I went back to playing with my cousin and brought it up. She agreed that big black snakes kept reappearing periodically. So I wasn't crazy. After a bit of playing more, I began to feel crazy, however, because at one point I saw 4 of them together with just a bit of spacing between them. They all sank out of existence within a short moment. I felt alarmed and ran to my parents. My parents and uncle were sitting near the doorway of the patio. As I tried to interrupt their conversation, I felt they were having a serious discussion. Uncle was telling my parents about the spirits in this new house. They all looked at me and asked me what I wanted. I told them about the snakes, and then my uncle cut me off. He screamed at my parents. "Oh yeah. That's right. And that's another thing. There's also snakes. In the yard here. They appear and then disappear." My dad was new to all this, so he seemed bothered. He married into the family. Meanwhile, my mom just seemed indifferent. She was used to this after all. My dad thought uncle was lying. By the time my next visit to uncle rolled around, they had gotten a pet dog. A small white dog with curly hair. It had a temper. Because it was so aggressive, I couldn't play with it. Since it was left outside, I decided to play with cousin indoors. His name was Charlie, and I only got to meet him once. While playing with cousin in her room, we were disturbed by screaming outside. Hey, look! We darted outside. From the door leading to the backyard, we couldn't see anything. We then heard shuffling to the left of the home. Uncle was by the side of the house in front of the electric meter box. He was hidden by a sharp turn. As we waltzed towards his direction, we saw he looked puzzled and shocked. He was holding down a shovel by force. He began to grumble to himself rather than to us, which was typical of him. I had it. What happened? I had it. I saw one of those snakes. One of those snakes. I had it. I slammed it down with a shovel, but still it got away. By going through the earth. But I had it. Had it pinned down. When my parents came by to pick me up, I heard Charlie barking like mad. That would be the last time I heard Charlie, who was pretty quiet during the shovel fiasco. When it was time to revisit, my parents broke the news. They told me Charlie was found dead in the backyard one morning. I confronted my cousin about Charlie. We were in the backyard discussing. As I listened to her explanation, I saw the snakes in the background going in and out of reality. The usual. She said Charlie slept outside and that he liked to dig under the shed. He would crawl half his body into this tiny house in the middle of the backyard, and that's how he typically slept. When it was time for breakfast, they would whistle and he would dig out of the shed shelter. On this particular day, Charlie didn't respond. Cousin went to drag him out from under. His head was missing. Uncle told everyone that it must have gotten into a fight with another animal and it ran off with the head. I didn't believe that explanation at all. But my cousin did. They ended the story with Uncle placing Charlie's corpse in a bag and then throwing him into a dumpster. That part, for some reason, disturbed me the most. Since Grandpa lived with Uncle and not me, my own home was calm and normal. It's been a few months since I moved out of Grandpa's by this time. I had a PlayStation 1 which had its price cut in half upon the release of the PS2. All we could afford, haha. And that was life really. Pre-Adult Swim, Cartoon Network and Spyro games. I adjusted pretty well to this piece. So imagine my shock when later that day, after returning from my uncle's home and hearing about Charlie's death in depth, I was attacked. I was laying on my race car bed when I felt something heavy land on my chest. One of the black snakes. It flailed around mindlessly. No direction, no purpose. It just spazzed out. I am one of those people who would begin to see the world in slow motion when adrenaline hit its climax. As my vision adjusted in between my screams, I noticed this snake was not actually a snake. Sure, it was big and black. But it had fingers. It was also not covered in scales. It was hairy. This was the cryptid of Mexican legend. The hairy arm, or as it is usually called, la mano peluda. Not a full minute went by that my parents ran to my bloody yelping. As soon as I saw Dad at my door, I managed to roll out of bed and fell to the carpet. I began to crawl towards my parents. My dad was not at all familiar with the paranormal, so he must have assumed a burglar was under my bed or something. The hairy hand was still flailing about like a fish out of water. It had a source too. From my point of view, it seemed the arm originated from the side of the bed pushed against the wall. Dad grabbed the race car bed and slid it across the room. The hand shot up straight and then quickly sank through the carpet. No man in sight. After that, my visits to Grandpa and Uncle became a rarity. Dad did not want me to associate with Grandpa anymore. Most of the time, actually, I wasn't even allowed to leave the truck and go inside the house. Grandpa always had to go to the front driveway to greet me. He would always give me some money. I know for a fact hauntings progressed in that house. But I wasn't allowed in, so I only heard the details through my cousin's account. Years later, my cousin told me she knew all along those snakes weren't actually snakes. She told me those hands would often jump and slam themselves towards the kitchen window. They would stick to glass for a mere second before falling off. You could count all 5 fingers if you calmed down fast enough. It only happened to the kitchen window because that's the only window facing the backyard. No snakes appeared in the front yard. Grandpa knew, too. Everyone would always flinch and jump and the smacking sound. Except for Grandpa. Darn, I didn't get to the part where Grandpa got kicked out. Something insane happened the month he got thrown out. I'll post in the next personal experiences thread. Only Grandpa can attract a whole nest of hairy hands. I remember this like it was yesterday. It still haunts me 20 years later. B9. In bed but not asleep, playing Super Battle Tank on Sneeze with the volume on low. Door opens, think it's my parent catching me playing vidja past my bedtime. Quickly press the power on the TV remote and pull covers over to pretend to be sleeping. Hear nothing. Peek. Door open, I can see down the empty dark hallway. See faint silhouette of a tall person at the end of hall. Call out to my mom. Silhouette gets closer, I can now see detail of a man wearing a grey suit and he has a green face with no features, could have been some kind of mask or helmet. Scream for Dad. Grey suit man is now entering my room, having to duck under doorway, he was so tall. Scream louder for Dad. Flash of intense red light. My memory is a bit disjointed at this point, there are a lot of gaps after this. Next thing I remember standing in a small red room, or it was lit by a red light. Can't move. Can't speak. Hear mechanical wind up noises behind me. Feel something grab right shoulder and some kind of tool like an air hammer being used. No pain, just terrified beyond belief. Was shown a panel with an image of a planet with red rings. Wake up in bed, bright morning sun in room. Jump out of bed. Run to parents eating breakfast at the table. I'm crying and yelling, asking them why didn't they hear me calling for help. A man was in my room and took me. Mom and Dad look at each other baffled. Tell me it was a bad dream and I should just forget about it. For a long time I thought it was bad dream, but the experience still haunts me. No other dream in my life has ever affected me like this. It's too frightening to believe it was real. This wasn't from when I was a kid, I was 18, but it's probably the weirdest experience of my life. To preface this, my dad died about 3 months after my 18th birthday. He worked on cars a lot and had all sorts of parts and tools in the garage of the house we lived in. My ex and I were at the house late one night after he died to pick up some stuff from my room and other parts of the house. We were about to leave when this happened, but this made us just head out without a second thought. We heard moving or crashing metal sounds coming from the empty and inaccessible without a key garage. There was absolutely no reason to explain that. It was late and my neighbors were all older people that were quiet by 10 at the latest. Our city trash cans were plastic, and we didn't even have one anyway, and the amount of tools and parts in that garage was insane. Could something have just fallen? Possibly, but my dad was a very organized guy even in the months leading up to his death, and shit wasn't lying around randomly. It also wasn't one crash or shift, but several. Be me, 24 years old. Last night approximate 1:45 am. Laying in bed, can't sleep. Can hear fish tanks in our living room. Can also hear the YouTube vids my GF is watching in lounge. In the distance can hear arguing between male and female. Interested. They argue for a while. Go to ensuite toilet to piss. Can't hear the arguing anymore. Perplexed. Lay back in bed, and can hear it again. Get out of bed, stand out front. Silence. This is another occurrence out of several leading me to believe there is a presence in our rental home. Live in Australia, West Coast specifically. Wet weather ATM. About 3 months ago noticed scratching noises in the roof. It's just rats. The 3 months part is important. Last 3 months steady decline of my mental health, linked. 2 weeks ago. GF and I wake at 6 am, exact same time. Sounds like a grown man is throwing himself around in the roof, and can visibly see the roof bearing weight. Check, nothing. I am a skeptic, and a staunch type. Screw this. JPEG. GF heavy stoner, could sleep through a tornado, I sleep deeply anyways. Poke head through manhole, there's nothing. Roof insulation has been moved / flipped etc. Weather though, wind? Calmly I say these exact words. If there is someone here it's time to leave. If there is someone here who does not hold a physical form, you are not welcome here, and you were never invited. Activity ceases until last night. The activity is also very minimal when I'm not home. This leads me to believe something has tried to latch to me, or has given my mental strength decline over the past 3 months. From what I understand, that's what these things do, right? Weaken you to vulnerability. I used to live in a mobile home where there were my room and my parents' room were connected by a hallway. In order for my parents to leave their room, they had to pass mine. They usually wake up early in the morning to go to work. So one night I woke up, and since I was still a kid, my room was illuminated with a blue light. I see this shadow tiptoeing across my door, and thought that it was my dad going to work. He woke up at like 4 am to go, but the problem was that the door was closed and there no way to see the shadow without seeing my dad, so I freaked the hell out. It just kept tiptoeing across the door and it eventually left. I couldn't sleep for hours. And my window shutters were closed too. I don't know if I'm misremembering it, but I swear it's what I saw. B14. House was owned by a fortune teller before us. Massive Coomer. Late at night watching TV in living room. My older sister's sound comes from her room. Not exactly her room though, it felt like she was near and her room door was closed. Hey, how are you come here is what I remember. Scared shitless, but I comfort myself by thinking she must be talking on the phone or something. Next morning, ask her jokingly who was she talking with. She has no idea what I'm talking about. I've experienced something similar 2 years later. I also experienced a dream which I vividly remember. 17 years old. Sitting near the back during English class. Suddenly feels like an explosion rips through my shoulder. Me and my desk get launched several feet in the air. What the freaking shit. JPG. Legit scared the shit out of me. Felt like a hand made of electricity grabbed me by the shoulder and lifted me into the air and let go. There was one kid sitting behind me and he was freaked out. My neck and shoulder turn bright red and start swelling. Teacher sends me to the nurse. Of course she has no idea WTF happened. I have a bit of a hard time breathing but swelling starts to go down, so I get sent back to class. Still no idea what the hell happened, but my shoulder is screwed up to this day. I have to get steroid injections just to function because the pain is unbearable otherwise. I've had x-rays and an MRI and the docs have told me that there are abnormalities, but nothing they can point to, that they can say definitely is causing my issues. When I was around 6 I saw a shadow man in my bedroom. I lived in a pretty old house, was at least 100 years old although probably much older. The place wasn't creepy and I had many pleasant memories there. That said, some pretty strange shit happened. The first event I distinctly recall was waking up in the middle of night at the age of 6 and seeing the silhouette of a man in my room. There was a street lamp outside my room which cast a small amount of light into it, but it had never created a shadow like that before. The other thing was there was nothing in my room that could cast a shadow like that. It looked like a medium-height man. I was quite frightened and called for my mother, but she couldn't see it. I ended up trying to convince myself it wasn't there and went back to sleep. The second major event happened around 2 years later. My parents had just up some wooden standing shelves for my toys. They had been there for at least 2 days without incident until they collapsed down at the exact moment I climbed onto my bed. Call it coincidence, but I always felt strange about it. It was only after we eventually moved out that we had any idea that the events were paranormal. The family that moved in kept in contact with us and said that a medium they were friends with had visited the property and said there was a presence there, albeit a non-hostile one that simply wanted the manifest itself. I never felt threatened there, but it's still pretty creepy when I tell people about it. Like other people in the thread, I had some shadow people experiences when I was a kid, but they were all pretty benign. My family moved into a newly built home, and when I'd walk into the bathroom or go down the halls I'd see a completely black figure with only tiny white lights for eyes just standing there or sitting somewhere, usually looking at me. Whenever this happened though I'd run out, and if I looked back they were gone. The only other paranormal thing that happened in that home happened to my sister. She used to go up on the roof to tan, and had to step on the counter to boost herself up into the window. One day she went up to tan as usual, and she said her foot slipped, and she should have fallen and hit her head on something, but instead something solid caught her foot and she was able to get through the window. When she looked back she said there was nothing there. To this day she's sure it was an angel. I'm inclined to believe it was something paranormal, but not sure it was necessarily an angel. I normally have very bad episodes of sleep paralysis to the point where I'm just used to it and I wait for it to be over. But one night when I was about 15 I went to sleep and awoke to blue light all around me. I couldn't really hear anything other than an extremely loud whirring sound all around. My eyes were barely open at this point and I was struggling to keep them open, and I started to sense that this wasn't a normal paralysis dream, because it was lasting a lot longer than it usually does. 15 to 20 seconds max. This was going on for about 5 minutes. I start to think that I might be dying in my very own bed and start calling for my mom to no avail. My eyes start to free up and I manage to get a decent look at my surroundings. I'm in a blue circular room with white lights that look kind of like LEDs where the trim is supposed to be. I noticed that I'm harnessed to the bed and I cannot move a muscle, even the parts of me that are not harnessed like my fingers are completely immobile. I look to the foot of the bed and I notice that there's 3 figures standing there watching me. I can tell that they are humanoid in shape, but it looks like they are completely made out of the white noise from a TV. At this point I'm terrified and breathing heavily. I hear them say something in a muffled tone, as if there was something covering their mouths. One of the figures begins putting a black tube apparatus down my throat, and when this happens I begin to feel my lungs relax and I no longer feel the need to breathe. The rest of the experience is very fuzzy, and after I woke up I was in my room again and only about 10 minutes had passed since I'd first gone to sleep. Every so often I get this recurring itch in my right ear and the skin peels off on its own, leaving a red circular mark. Be me, about 7 or 8 years old. Paranormal shit constantly happening to me. One particular night I wake up around 2 a.m. to the doorbell ringing. Not just one ring but constant ringing. Look outside, my window faces front yard. Tall man in tattered overcoat and hat standing in our grass staring back at me. Too dark to see face, only silhouette. Doorbell starts ringing faster along with knocking, man never moves. I hide under my covers and eventually fall asleep with the knocks and ringing still going. Next morning tell my parents what happened. Nobody else heard a thing and think I was just dreaming. The next day our doorbell stopped making the normal ding-dong noise. It still works fine, but it's just a loud buzzing noise instead. Fast forward a couple weeks later. Aunt comes to visit. Parents tell her about my dream. She makes fun of me for the rest of the day and teases me about ghosts. Next morning I wake up. Aunt is sitting at the table with my parents, visibly shaken. Ask what happened. Aunt says she was on the couch and heard the ding-dong of the doorbell. She got up to see who was outside. Confused as to who would be visiting in the middle of the night, she looks through the glass in the door but nobody was there. She goes back to the couch and sits down. Doorbell rings again. At this point she's annoyed because she thinks it's kids playing ding-dong ditch. She swings the door open and nobody is there. She scans around and sees a man in an overcoat and hat standing about 200 yards, 180-ish meters, away under a street light. She slams the door shut and locks it before going back to the couch. The ringing starts again, but doesn't stop. Ding dong ding dong ding dong. Ringing lasts for several hours as she sits on the couch freaking out. In both cases, nobody else heard the ringing or knocking. This is a small house, so you'll hear it from the furthest room with no trouble whatsoever. What my aunt doesn't know is that the doorbell doesn't ring anymore, just buzz. There was an event as a child where I was in the lunchroom at school and suddenly my whole body got really cold while sitting at the table. Out of nowhere I lost all feeling in my body and my vision began to fade. Darkness enclosed around my vision like a tunnel, and then as everything went black, and as my middle schooler brain thought, I don't want to die like this, my vision turned into absolute static. Kind of like a TV on a channel with no cable. Weirdly, for a portion of everything somewhere around the static vision, I could see myself going through everything and I was just kind of slumped there with my eyes glazed over till a nurse came. I later woke up in the hospital, but when I asked what happened I could never get a real medical explanation, and the event never happened again, so I'm still confused. I just always assumed I passed out, but I was trying to resist it and some weird shit happened. Be me, 9 or 10 years old. Have family gathering at my parents' house. Be a weakling already in bed at 9 p.m. Doze off to the sound of people laughing and talking downstairs. 11 p.m. piss attack comes. Go piss. Back to bed, settling myself in. Eyes shutting, body heavy. Take one last glance at room. One of my aunts sitting at the end of my bed. WTF, didn't hear no door opening. Call her out with no reply. Screw it, I'm going to bed. Wake up at 9 a.m. Fuzzy head remembered my aunt came in last night to check on me. MFW realized I don't have an aunt with long black hair and wore a red dress last night. I just saw a goddamn ghost.jpg. When I was younger, maybe 6 to 8 years old, I was lying in bed sitting up watching cartoons on a tiny little TV I had. All the lights were on when I suddenly had this eerie feeling come over me, and I looked towards the door to my room. Between my bed and door was a desk, when I saw this skeleton pop up with red eyes, laughing and shaking around like he was having a seizure. I started screaming and my parents ran in and said it was just a dream, but there was no way I was asleep during any of that. Probably wasn't paranormal, but still creeped the crap out of me. Live in large 2-story house. It was just my mom and us 3 brothers. My shithead biological father was out drinking as usual. The 4 of us all sleep in the master bedroom with my mom because we were scared of the house. We never really liked the house to begin with. One night we wake up sometime around midnight to loud bangs coming from downstairs. It sounded like someone was banging on the door, but with so much strength the entire house was vibrated, like when you slam the front door shut in a small house. However, the banging wasn't coming from the front door, it was coming from the garage. Except the garage is inaccessible from the front of the house. You can only enter from the backyard, which is only accessible through a locked gate outside or, obviously, the back door inside the house. We just all lay there in bed frozen in fear as the loud banging goes on for like 10 solid minutes. Eventually it stops. We couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. My mom even turned the TV on to calm us down. From that day on we made a point of locking every single door inside the house before going to bed. Thank God we moved from that house. From the moment we first stepped in, I just felt something about it was so unwelcoming. Interesting thread. There are actually 2 situations in my life that I still have to think about frequently even after more than 20 years. The first one is pretty trivial. I remember when I was a child I had problems going to the toilet because I was afraid there was a strange man in there. And I can remember absolutely clearly a situation where I entered the toilet and a man stood there and looked at me. I ran out and screamed, but when my parents looked, there was nobody there. I was 100% sure that there was someone. I have no explanation for that. Looking back, I was pretty sure that it was the father of my biological father who died at that time. The other thing is a memory that keeps coming back to me. As a child there was a moment when I was absolutely convinced that everything that happens from that moment on is a dream. As if I would fall asleep and never wake up again. It was a normal day, but I still remember very well what I did. I was playing on a sand hill with turtles figures, and at some point I was back in the apartment. There I sat on the floor and fell asleep and suddenly had this thought for no reason that everything is not real anymore. And I still have to think about it, after all these years, still. Nothing super duper scary, but here are a few little occurrences. Age 4. In bed facing the wall. Say some shit about lions. Rough gravelly voice repeats exactly what I said back to me. Another one. Wake up to brother screaming and crying for my mom. Door was wide open and an abnormally bright light was beaming into the room. Mom comes in and turns a lamp on. Light turns off. Another one. New house. Age 6. Brother's room is now in the basement. Mine is upstairs. Brother comes running up to my room where I was with my mom. He's crying. Says he heard a knock at his door. When he went to open it there was no one there. Didn't close it. Turned around and looked in the reflection of a small TV he had. In the doorway was a veiled figure standing behind him. Turns around, still nothing there. He runs up to me and my mom. Another one. Age 14 to 18. My room is now my brother's old basement room. I frequently hear knocking at my door even though no one ends up being there. Couldn't be some other creaking in the house since it had a rhythm to it, and it was always the exact same sound. Pass it off as me being a shithead. Friend comes over. Hey, someone knocked on your door. Open it. No one. Not so much a scary event, but a strange/eerie happening. I was about 8 years old, it was sorta late if I remember right, my bed ends right before the window. I had a night light cause I've always been neurotic and get really in my own head, but it lit that part of my room in a way where nothing could really easily cast weird shadows. I looked up at some point and saw a fully body shadow run across from my bedroom door to the window and then disappear. The shadow clearly had messy curly hair, and 8 years later, I had a niece who matched that shadow perfectly. She would entertain herself when she'd visit by barging into my door and running to the window and back out like the shadow did. I never necessarily thought it as paranormal per se, but very strange, but very well could have been a weird coincidence from my overactive mind. Not sure what to think of this, but oh well. Out shopping with my mum, I must have been age 5 or 6. At a crossing close to home. Stop waiting for the lights to change. Old man stands next to us and crouches down to me. Hello little lady, do you want some sweets? Oh hell yeah. JPG. He gives me some Celebrations, brand of small individually wrapped chocolate bars. Lights change and he doesn't cross, but me and my mum do. He doesn't leave either, he just stands there at the crossing. My mum tells me to give her the sweets and I do, and she puts them in her bag. Thinking back, she probably dropped them on the floor. Mum takes us a long way back instead of going straight down the hill to get home. Later ask if I can have those sweets. Oh sorry Anon, I must have lost them, I'll get you some different ones. I don't know if it was my mum being paranoid or if she genuinely felt danger that I wouldn't have at that age. I'm also not sure why she'd take a long way home unless the guy was following or something. Maybe I should ask my mum if she remembers this sometime. I've seen a lot of stuff in my sort of block of suburbs in my life, but there's only one thing that I guess you could say happened to me. I live in what must be the suburban capital of the world, because that's all there is, and because I've lived here all my life, I know it like the back of my hand. I was walking home from a friend's one late night, not a far walk, maybe 2 miles or so. I was close with them, so I probably walked to and from their house maybe 4 or 5 times a week. It was pretty late, after 2 a.m., but I frequently came home late, had my own key, etc. Anyway, I was almost home, and was making the left turn onto what should have been my street, but it wasn't. Completely alien, different road layout, different houses, different streetlights, this was definitely not my street. In the moment I stopped and realized this, I got hit by the most intense feeling of panic I'd ever felt. It wasn't so much anxiety as it was just this intense feeling of dread and repulsion, like I wasn't where I was supposed to be, and I had a violently negative reaction to it. Panicked, I turned and just bolted down the street that I'd came down, but it wasn't the same street. I didn't recognize anything, which only made the feeling of unease worse. I just kept running until I came onto a local convenience store, and ran inside. The lights were on, but I don't think there was a clerk behind the counter. I sped into the bathroom, locked the door, and just sat there, trying to let the panic wash out. When I finally felt like I'd regained some sense of security, I checked my phone to see that an hour had passed. It was now 3 a.m., or close to it. I walked out of the bathroom, and the clerk was now behind the counter. He tried to say something to me, but it was like I was in shock. It was kind of distant. I ignored it, and walked out, and found that I was at a convenience store maybe 6 miles from my house. Not willing to chance what happened again, I called a lift back to my house, and got home safely. Shit still makes my skin crawl until this day. I was pretty young at the time, maybe 6 or 7. The neighbors across the street had a kid my age, so we would get together and play out in the woods, play video games, ride bikes around the neighborhood, other kid stuff. I remember very vividly a nightmare I had. He and I were at his house in the driveway. From the woods comes something. I still don't know what it is, but it's pale white and a humanoid figure. It runs towards us and we run. It's chasing us and I turn back, and as it's about to grab me I wake up. I slowly walk to my parents' room and tell my mom I had a bad dream. She says something like, "It's not real, go back to sleep." I start heading back to my room after she calms me down, but as I reach the living room the hallway comes into full view, as line of sight was blocked by the TV, back when TVs were actually thick. Standing there I see the figure, scream something like, "But I can still see it," and run back into my parents' room. Never told anybody about it. Probably just scared little kid stuff.